Welcome to the podcast.
歡迎收聽
요코소 팟캐스트에
به پادکست ما خوش آمد.
مقیم با این پادکست 欢迎来到我们的播客
Benvenuti sul podcast.
Komentar podcast.
日本からこんにちは
Buongiorno
你
dall'Italia.
好嚟自香港
Hello from New York.
שלום, אז איראן.
Hallo aus Deutschland.
שלום מישראל
Hello, world culture enthusiasts. Welcome back to another episode of Crossing Cultures, a podcast where guests from all of I always get this wrong. Welcome back to another episode of Crossing Cultures, a podcast where guests from all over the world talk about the subtle, surprising, intriguing, and bizarre cultural differences in everyday life. My name is Asaf, and today we have a bit sophisticated of an episode because today we're going to be talking about arts. I know seems like a very broad subject, but arts are universal and inherent to human culture, and yet our approach to art is very different all over the world. I'll let my guests introduce themselves. Let's go with Daniel.
Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm from Venezuela, and I live in Israel since 7 years ago.
7 years? And
Yeah.
what have you been doing in these 7 years?
I've been mostly walking around the beach in Tel Aviv, also working and raising my cats.
And you notice that the beaches in Israel are different from Venezuela.
Yeah, theirs are better, but shouldn't say that. I love them here too.
All right, okay. And next?
Hi, my name is Noemi. I'm come from France. I arrived in Israel 2 years ago, and I'm studying in Betzalel in Yerushalayim. That is an art school.
Yeah, it's probably the art school in Israel. That's
The
what they
art
say.
school.
All right. So you know a little bit about art.
I won't say anything.
Okay.
My name is Tetsumu Kojima. I came to Israel in 2010, so now it's 9 years.
And you are from?
I'm from Tokyo, Japan.
From Tokyo. And
Yeah.
what brought you to Israel from Tokyo?
I married with Israeli,
Ah.
so I have 3 kids now in here.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what do you do?
I working for a TV station,
Mhm.
but for creative part, making the promo, editing, designing.
I see. All right. So
Nice.
that's creative.
Yeah.
And last but not least,
Hi, I'm Gunther from the United States. I've been traveling for about a year around the world, and then my girlfriend moved to Israel, so I came here about 3 months ago. I work as an attorney, but I love to do travel photography. I focused on street art in the different cities I went to, and I've been enjoying the street art here in Tel Aviv, and
and where are you from in the States?
Oregon on the West Coast.
Yes. All right. So we'll just jump right in. We have a very diverse panel here.
Mhm.
I want to ask you, the first question is, how is art taught in schools in your country? Do they even give attention to it? Or if they do, what grade do they start talking with kids about art? And how do they do it? Is it practical? Is it...
Well, first of all, I have to say that the country I was raised in, Venezuela, from many years ago, and the country Venezuela is today, it's probably not the same country because
Mhm.
of a political situation. We'd rather not go into in detail now, but I can talk from my personal experience. We used to see art classes back in basic school and then also in high school, but it was more like once a week.
And what would you call art school, like art classes? Like what would be considered art
They
classes?
would give us colors. They would show us how to paint,
Mhm.
and we would discuss different sorts of arts.
All right. I think that when you talk about teaching art, there's two different aspects of it. You can teach art history. You can teach about famous artists. You can teach about maybe different genres of art. It's a very intellectual approach. And then there's the hands-on approach, which says, here's some paint, finger paint. Here, do this, do that, paint. And try and broaden your creativity. So, when you say art classes, to which of the two do you mean?
Both.
Both.
Yeah.
Okay, so you would say that the average Venezuelan child or the Venezuelan student knows what about art?
Well, first, the average middle-class Venezuelan probably. There is a huge distinction in social classes in Venezuela, unfortunately. So I cannot really speak for people who didn't manage to get in certain schools.
Mm-hmm.
but mostly we would discuss Latin American art and Venezuelan art,
Okay.
which
Interesting.
is convenient because you're living there in Venezuela, so you would discuss that.
Okay.
On the other side, Venezuela has this tradition from independence, the times where the glorious warriors were against the Spain and these battles that you have to remember by heart.
Uh-huh.
And then there was a period where painters would paint about these historic events. The battle of this, the battle of that, liberator this, general that. And believe it or not, as an art itself, it was quite relevant because they were influenced by French. I'm talking about the 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
So also we got to see all these things on the bills. The money,
Yeah.
you could see the general this or general that.
Yeah.
So at least you could know from where this painting come from.
You know what? That's a really interesting topic. I think we should get to that if we have time, about how art is used to teach history. And I remember in Mexico, I don't know if it's a representative of Latin America as a whole, but in Mexico, a lot of the art really depicts historic events, and there's huge art on buildings. I don't know if it's the same in Venezuela. You're nodding.
Not as big as Mexico, I would say, because Mexico has this tradition for mural
Yeah.
art, which
Yeah.
is really big there. No, it's mostly paintings, small paintings,
Mhm.
that you would find in these very important museums there.
I see. All right. Interesting. All right, Noemi.
I think during primary school it is a bit the same, like again also for middle class, and no, actually in France everybody's go to the same kind of school, so it's a bit more homogeneous. So primary school, yes, we learn about like European a great painter, Mondrian, Picasso, Chagall, by doing like recreating what they do. For example, Mondrian with the line or some collage. During like secondary school, you also have class, but it's a bit less. Like it's more like 1 hour a week, and it's really on the side. Like the proportion comparing to mathematics or French or English, whatever, history is really small.
Mm-hmm.
And the moment you arrive in high school, it completely disappears.
Uh-huh.
So if you don't choose to have a major in art, you won't anymore until high school. You won't learn art anymore. So yeah, that's a bit.
But I mean,
sad.
I would imagine, as not being French, that French culture is intertwined. It's like in the French DNA is the cuisine, as a French cuisine, and the French art, or at least the appreciation of art,
Yes.
because of all the museums and because of the history of France and the Louvre, or famous museums that are in France as part of like France being the place for art in Europe in the past maybe 2 centuries. So, how does that come across in just conversating with the average French person? Do they know their artists? Do they know how to tell apart Magritte and Renoir? And
I think it's depending on the class you're coming from, but yes, most people have a landmark about like who are the French painter, who are the French architect, Le Corbusier. That is from streets actually, but yes, they have like big ideas about who are the French artists, but in detail, it has to be your own interest. If you want to know exactly the life of Chagall or Picasso, it has to be your own research.
Yeah,
But yes, people are going to museum in general.
Just as a pastime?
Yes,
Not
as a
because
leisure.
they have to.
No, as a leisure. Like the average people are going. Like maybe I would say, okay, I would talk for myself.
Of course.
But I would say like twice a month to the museum. So yes, it is like an activity that people do.
All right, interesting. That's
About the education?
yeah. How is art approached in Japanese education?
Yeah, from the primary school we have this art,
Mm-hmm.
and to also junior high school and the high school. The thing is, in the school education it's quite boring, because it's not try to educate like creative mind. It's more like you play with a watercolor and sketch the site, like exactly look like a real. So it's quite boring. And even myself, I didn't believe myself to go in this direction in my life. But in 1980s time, like there is a trend like it is cool to be like a designer or this kind of job. So then this time, a lot of the young kids start approach to be artists. But before this, it's quite boring.
Okay, I want to ask you like a follow-up question to that.
Yeah.
That Japan is, I would say, it's a cultural autarky. It produces so much culture that I don't know how Japanese people can have time to consume other cultures. And because all around the world people consume whatever culture they have, and in addition to that, American culture, of course, which is everywhere, and Japanese culture, which is now everywhere. So my question is, how much, what is the makeup of how much Japanese art history, Japanese artists are taught in Japanese schools, and let's say either Western artists in art, Leonardo da Vinci, Donatello, and things like that, or maybe from other Asian countries.
No, they generally in education, they teach general stuff, like a European art history and Japanese artist as well, and not Asian artist actually, because the education system are built by the, post-war. So that's why like the standard of the education is more to, especially for art, is more focused to Europe.
Interesting.
But the thing, and why, your question, why Japanese have this crazy art style, no?
I mean, it's like just so there's so much of it, so obviously we would notice the crazy parts.
I think because education is so boring, it's so square, so people want the other side. And they are going to this way because the social life and the education is so strict and the square. That's why they go into this way.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And now, because when I think of it, we always talk about like how to educate people to be more creative, and you say, all right, give them freedom, give them, let them do whatever they want, give them paint. Yeah. And then I think Japan is an example of, if you say the education system is strict, somehow out the other end, you still produce really the most creative and the craziest types of art and fashion and
art and fashion and entertainment and food, everything hardcore.
Yeah.
Because people really want this. Because, for example, Israel is too much free. So if you go to sushi place, you have a very simple sushi.
Yeah.
There's not a hardcore sushi like crazy stuff what we have in Japan.
Of course, but we don't have like seafood anyway. So
No, you can have a seafood, but the thing is like the real life is freedom, and also sometimes in the tense, in a politically wise. That's why they are not attracted to this kind of like taste. But on the other hand, Japan, like it's very not strict. It's still become free a little bit, but kind of like so boring in some point.
So you have to break out of that.
So you really want to go to fantasy side, which are not exist in real life.
That makes a lot of sense.
Because, for example, like you have a school every day, and it's quite boring. But on the other hand, you can buy comics, manga book, everywhere.
Yeah.
So you have.
You need both, I guess.
Yeah, we have a both.
Yeah.
But we, on our case, we have a totally different way.
So there's no middle ground. It's either you learn, even when you learn art, you learn the boring stuff, and you learn it in a very constructed, managed way.
Yeah.
and then if you want to transition over to the creative side, it's you switch everything. It's altogether a different world.
It's a good strategy actually to teach boring stuff if it can lead to such a crazy artist.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree, but I don't know how long it would take. I mean, it might take thousands of years. All right, Gunther.
Yeah. Actually, the U.S. is like the European system. I think up through 6th grade, you're encouraged to like paint and draw and play with clay and so on. My brother, who was very creative at a young age, he would draw he would get comic books at home to learn anatomy. He would like trace the comic book heroes. And but I think after 6th grade, it starts to, you can choose to do art, but it's not required. And the further along you go, the more history it goes, more theoretical, as opposed like you appreciate art as opposed to creating art. And there's sort of this capitalist, let's say it's a capitalist idea of like, if you're not going to make money doing this, why are you wasting your time being educated about it? I think there's a little bit of that in America as well.
But you do get like art scholarships and this art.
Yeah, no, we have a lot of good art schools, but there is sort of this, this idea of if you're not going to be super successful and make a lot of money at it, why go into the arts? And I myself have like a day job, but then I like to do a lot of creative projects on the side, and I feel like that's a much more balanced way, and a lot more people a lot of people give up on art because they feel like they can't do it as a job. And I'm like, that's wrong. That cheats the world of whatever it is you have to contribute.
Yes, I think like the moment you need to choose what you're going to do for your life, art school, design school, or architecture, it's a bit different. It didn't appear as a credible option for your life. When they do the presentation, like what may be your future, they would say like business school, law university, but being an artist is not an option actually. So.
And what would you say, Gunther, is the average American? I know that you should take this expression with a grain of salt. There's no such thing as the average American, not the average Japanese, not the average Venezuelan, of course. But what would you say the average American knows about world arts or American arts?
That's a very good question. Like you say, average American is hard. I would say people who live in cities and who have exposure to galleries and exposure to museums would have higher than normal. College educated would have higher than normal amount of education about art. I say people that haven't had that advantage. It is sort of this, it is perceived as an elitist thing in a lot of corners, especially because it tends to be in museums and it tends to be in art galleries, and these are places that not everyone goes to, not everyone can see. And that's, again, one of the reasons I enjoy street art, is that a lot of the artists are themselves from the barrio, from like different neighborhoods, self-educated, or they learned in art school and then go to these places and make the places more beautiful. Sorry, I keep detouring to the street art, but I would say America, we're ignorant in a lot of ways, I gotta be honest. I wish we knew, especially about other world art. We're very good about our stuff, but we kind of stink at appreciating other countries.
I think in Israel there's a lot of. I'm not a good example because I went to an art school. But what you do is you learn art, even all throughout middle school. But I think in Israel, when the approach to art is very similar. You teach like a little bit of. It's mostly non-hands-on. It's mostly theoretical. And you kind of, you check the marks where Picasso, Leonardo da Vinci, maybe like 5 or 6 very, very famous European artists, and then the rest is if you major in art, or if you're in Israel, like you kind of major in high school. So if you major in high school, that's your major is art, or then if you go on your own to study. But I would say the average Israeli knows who painted the Mona Lisa. They would know who painted the Sixtine Chapel. They would maybe know, recognize a Picasso from a Van Gogh or something like that. They say that is the average, but they wouldn't know like a little bit over that unless they are very educated, not in the system. Okay, let's talk about museums. So are the museums? You said in France. We'll start with France. You said it's a pastime that people actually go. I don't think in Israel people go to museums, not art museums, unless there's a very specific exhibition. It's like that's marketed very well. But just like as a general, just to go and observe and look at art, I don't think it's such a common pastime.
But I think that's the point, because in Paris, for example, the cultural programmation is just amazing. It's one of the best in the world. You have like 1,000 museums, I think. So when like museums are putting so much effort into like creating amazing exhibition and marketing it and offering workshops, so people are going, yes.
And is it funded by the government, the museums?
It depends. Like you have like the state museums that are belonging to the states, national museum like le Louvre, for example, that you may know, or le Centre Pompidou. Yes, they are, but you also have like private foundation, like Cartier Foundation, and this is more like founded by private sponsors or things like that.
And how much is an average ticket to a museum?
So it's been 2 years that I'm not there anymore. Maybe it changed, but I think it's between like 6 to 10 euros.
Oh, that's not a lot.
And you can have like, if you have a student card, so it's free. If you are like younger than 18, it's free. If you are really old, it's free as well.
It's free if you're younger than 18.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm
sure.
That's a lot of cultural
I'm
education.
Sure. Yes, definitely. Yeah. And you also have like, for example, you have like the Heritage Day or the Gallery Day. So these are specific events that are like organized to make people go.
Ah, I see. Yeah, they're doing it in Israel with the Cinema Day. 1 day a year, all the movies cost 10 shekel.
Great.
Just under $3 or something. All right, how about Venezuela?
Well, in Caracas, there are basically 2 museums. There are more, but the big ones, it's the Galería Nacional de Arte, that means National Gallery of Art, that has the General this and Battle that sort of painting. And then you have the Museum of Contemporary Art that has more recent things, like, say, Picasso. And now, because these 2 museums are very close to a park, I know for a fact that people end up in the museum because it's too hot outside. But it's good for the art and it's good for them.
Yeah.
And I think we all deserve a break from the sun sometimes. So I know that many people will enter this museum just because, it's too hot out here.
Oh, that's great. That's education through the back door.
Yeah, I agree. The problem is that because of economical circumstances, again, the museums are not as well maintained today as they used to be. And I have heard certainly bad news recently about the state of the museum in past years. But they have a decent collection, not comparable to anything in Europe, of course. But remember that Venezuela was very rich in the 70s. So then we could afford to
buy a lot of art.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Tetsu?
Yeah.
How about museums in Japan?
Yeah, for example, if I talk about inside of Tokyo, so each ward, you have a museum, but a half public, like a government support, and you have a big museum like this kind.
And is it common as a pastime for Japanese people to just go into a museum if it's not part of their profession?
It depends what they exhibit, but mainly, for example, like because this is a government-supported issue, so for example, like school kids can go, like
like a field trip.
field trip.
Yeah. All right.
And private foundation is less. Yeah, it's more public or governmental issue is more strong.
All right.
Yeah.
Gunther, I'll ask you, but I know that it's going to be tricky because, well, we talk about the U.S. as a country, but it's more like a continent. So I guess, I mean, kids from New York have a completely different experience of museums in New York City that they can go to, compared to kids from, I don't know, Idaho, that they have less. I don't know of any museum specifically in Idaho or an art museum. I'm sure
you haven't
there's.
heard of the Corn Museum?
I would think of it as a potato museum, but
Sorry, you're right. Potato Museum. My mistake.
but I mean, but no, yeah, of course. But I mean, there's like any kind of merchandise themed museum in the U.S. But
Yeah.
but specifically, if we talk about arts, then how do you? I don't even know how to ask this question. But like, what is the museum experience of, again, not a New Yorker, not someone from Chicago, not someone from the big cities? Like,
wow, you're kind of limiting it. No, well, it's funny because like where I spend a lot of time in Pennsylvania on the East Coast, close to New York, and in Oregon on the West Coast, and so we would go into New York. It would be like a special school trip. Like you get in the bus and you go to, like, if you live within a reasonable distance of the city, they will ship you in and like, hey, we're going to see a historical museum, we're going to see the art museum.
What would you consider a reasonable distance?
Oh, well, with kids, it's 2 hours, 3 hours, something like that.
Right.
You I don't know.
2 hours, 2 hours, and then 2 hours back. That leaves you like an hour in the museum.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right.
Yeah. So, but then, gosh, I'm trying to think. Or actually, Oregon as a state, it does a very good job of supporting the arts. They have a lot of street art. A lot of fairs, street fairs, where artists will actually set up a stall and sell their own art. So I think a lot of people, like I've actually bought a lot of art that way, sort of the entrepreneurship model. But yeah, there are like obviously Washington D.C. There are a lot of like state and government funded museums there, and the big cities have the big museums. And I think what happens is businesses of a local area outside the big cities will fund a museum as sort of a cultural touchstone, like we're keeping up with the big cities kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Have you noticed any? Because you're all art people, right? There's a reason you're here on this panel.
Yes.
So I want to ask about if there's any trends that you've noticed in your local art scene, and I mean, I'll say trend that could be the span could be hundreds of years if you want. Okay, you can think about historical art that's 200 years old compared to like more modern trends that are like 100 years old. So I'll let you answer that question however way you see fit.
Well, yeah, it's a big question. There is something called kinetic art. Kinetic art, it's related to sculpture. It's about colors and shapes in metal.
Movement.
And movement because of kinetic. Thanks.
Oh,
and
sorry, kinetic?
Kinetic. Thank you. Yeah, in Spanish is cinético, so I was trying to. So there were two big guys on the 50s who started the kinetic. They didn't started it, but they became big on their own. One is called Carlos Cruz-Diez. He's kind of famous in France, and not many Venezuelans know that he is actually Venezuelan, but some people in France actually know him. So it's ironical that he became famous there. Most people will know that in many official buildings you will have this gigantic kinetic sculpture, and they won't have any idea who made this. It's normally made by the same 3 or 4 guys who were doing this during the 50s. Now, the reason I say this is that today no one does kinetic art anymore. It's well past its stage. But there is something that was left behind, which is the idea of interacting with the art. Because something nice about kinetic art is that, generally speaking, you can't touch it, unlike other arts that you're not supposed to because they will break apart or you're supposed to worship them from a distance. Kinetic art encourages you to go and touch it. And, for example, it could be tiles on the floor, so you can have to step on them. Or it could be things hanging of plastic with different colors.
And what is the name of the artist that you mentioned?
Carlos Cruz-Diez.
All right. So
And the other is Jesús Soto.
All right. Well, we'll put a link to that in the description.
Sure. Now, the reason I started talking about this, because yes, it's a long story. It's a big country. I guess many other currents were happening there. Is because I know of, it's a friend of mine, but he is relatively famous. His name is Yucef Merhi. He does, let's call it cyber art. And it's really original. He started it like maybe 15 or to 20 years ago by hacking an Atari video game.
Yeah.
Well, he likes poetry, but then he couldn't feel like people would listen to his words. So what he did, and I'm talking about 15 years ago, so it was relatively revolutionary, was to hack an Atari, and then it made a game based on his poetry. I think there is a connection on the fact that kinetic art was so big, and that you had to touch it, that my friend, and not only my friend, an artist on its own, have this idea of, okay, but you can also touch video games, so why not put them together? And I think this is something that became big there, and I think we might hear in the future more about cyber artists, which is, by the way, it's getting very common nowadays.
Yeah.
So I would say that that's something that can be an answer to your question.
All right. Interesting.
Interesting. It's a difficult question, actually. I would say that I have the feeling or the intuition that young artists are trying to deal with maybe the current political questions such as sustainability or like hybrid identity, the question of gender and things like that. So we can see now, I saw few installations with like leftover materials, plastics, all of this like sustainability movement. I think there is also, especially in design, like a real big interest into craft and into things that are disappearing. Like, we are not buying any more tapestry. We are not buying any more like, or not a lot, like pottery, things like that. So people will try to learn those old crafts and try to make it, to renew it somehow.
So kind of like art tackling modern issues and also how would you say? You said like using reusable materials. I guess that's also part of it.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Also, maybe the idea of like using, as you say, a new technology like 3D printing, like I don't know, printer, things like that to renew like old tradition.
Interesting.
Like
all right, I'll bounce the question over to.
But it's not specific to France. I think it's more like general.
All right. I think in Japan, from what I know, a lot of the things that we consider new, if you look at Japan, it's been practiced for 100 years or 50 years. Even things in I know that in cinema, you look at the way Kurosawa uses lenses and perspectives, and you say, oh, that's so original. That's so, and then you look into it, and then you see that he's basing it off Japanese paintings that are hundreds of years old, or there's a lot of American remakes now that are remaking Japanese stories that are also 50 or 20 years old at least. So I'll continue the question. Like, have you noticed like a kind of a new trend, a new upcoming trend in Japanese art as a whole, as a movement?
Actually, the famous classic Japanese art is Ukiyo-e, right? But actually, this is I'm not considered this as an art because this is a silk screen which are designed for money produce, like
mass production.
Mass production. It's not like artists drawing, taking our. So the question is like, what is art? Okay, but
and it is for you.
if it skip out, okay, include manga, everything. This is art. Then I can say like actually, those trends are not so different actually from the ukiyo-e time. The manga and the ukiyo-e is same kind of things. Then we are continuing like a style is changed, but the conceptually it's not so different. But the new artist now famous, Takashi Murakami, he doing like with a figure or more models. And this will be also connected with the media art style. So it will be, but just style-wise, but I think they keep same concept.
Interesting. All right. Gunter?
Again, just because I've been traveling for the last 2 years, street art started out as this thing that was illegal. In a lot of countries it still is. You have to like do it at 2 a.m. And over the years it's become accepted, it's become commissioned. Art stores will actually hire people to like put a mural on the front of the thing, to design clothing. There's some art galleries that specifically cater to urban art, as they call it, and I think that's really exciting. Also, you see the emergence of kind of the micro artist, the artist that has followers on Facebook or Instagram and can build enough of an audience that way that they can start to sell prints, sell reproductions, as opposed to having to go through other means. So sort of more venues for the artists to expose their work to the world.
All right. So before we finish this section, I'll ask you, do people buy art for their home? And if so, is it more, do they actually care about the type of art, or is it more like, I need a picture and it should be dark colors, so I'll buy this one?
Well, I do remember people buying art because someone else told them that this particular artist would be worth more in a few years. So as a form of investment, but I don't think they were really concerned about the aesthetic appeal of the art. And I also knew people who were actually choosing specific art because they like it. It's mostly people with European ancestry. They would rather buy paintings, no matter what value it would have, as opposed to people who didn't have this ancestry there, that I don't really have a memory of seeing any single painting around. Let's remember that it's a very Catholic country, so people would rather have a picture of Virgin Mary or something, as opposed to some piece of art, as far as I remember.
That's a difficult question. I would say that yes, in France, like as we have this taste and flair and the really desire to have like nice place, but I think this is common to everyone. But yes, people are buying art. I won't say that they are buying like expensive painting, but maybe
It doesn't have to be expensive.
yeah, that's it. I think right now with all of what you have in internet, like platforms such as Etsy, for example, that really like allow you to buy for few euros a nice piece of art, and for example an illustration or a poster of a painting or poster of cinema. I think yes, people are decorating their house. Also, I think there is this right now. I did trends. You talked about trends before. To go into flea market and to look for like the nice treasure and the nice painting. I feel that this is also a part of the game.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah, early in the 90s, there is a trend. I forgot the name of the artist, but it's a drawing. It's a drawing of the whales or dolphins in.
Yeah.
You know this artist?
Yeah. I'm trying to remember. Is it a painting or is it?
It's a painting.
It's a painting.
We'll put the link.
Yeah.
It's a painting with like a realistic, but also very illusion.
Yeah.
Illusionary.
I can see it in my eye. I
and the
can't.
fluoro color sometimes.
I don't know the artist.
Everybody buy.
Yep.
And all restaurant sometime in the house, and it's cost like what $7,000 something.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For a copy, or for the
it's
original?
not copy. It's original.
It's original.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not copy. Like they have a number.
Yeah.
$7,000. But at that time, because why people could buy, because that time like our credit system was different. You make a credit card and you could get a loan whatever you want that time. And now they changed the law. You have certain income and you can get the loan or credit
based on the income.
based on this income,
I
but
see.
not over.
So you're saying that the people consider art as the financial side, the aspect of
Not
it.
financial, because nobody know this value actually. Just people think, it's cool. So that time,
I see. Okay.
because people were happy at that time, not so serious. Right?
So that's how, yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. When people are happy, they buy more art. They like to surround themselves with beautiful things. And
These
they're-
dolphin things,
Yeah.
whale in
Yeah. Well, nobody says I'm so happy I'll buy some morbid, macabre, dark
But
painting for my house.
this art was all over, like cafe, hotels, and friends' house, all
Yeah,
over.
because I noticed that in Japan there's arts where you usually wouldn't expect art to be, like inside bars and inside coffee shops. But I don't know if it's true for the houses. If you walk into a Japanese person's house, is there art on the wall?
There is like if I visit some old people, some people have like oil paint, and some friends told me he's working for those like art business things, like all paint is most selling than pop art in this business field.
All right. Well, before we finish, I want all of you to think of a lesser known artist from your culture that everyone you think must know. Okay, so give me an example of one artist from your culture. Maybe they might be famous, but even if they're not that famous, even if they are, you think it's a must know for everyone.
Yes, for Venezuela, I want to recommend Armando Reverón. He was a schizophrenic person who lived by himself with a gigantic doll on the mountain next to the city, and his model was the cleaning lady, shall we say. And even if you see in the picture that this lady, by our standards today, probably wouldn't consider very attractive, he considered her the most beautiful woman. He was trained in France. He was a professional painter, but he decided, maybe because of this mental condition, to paint by himself. He was enamored with the fact that the light in the tropics is so strong that compared to the light in actually, it's closer to Israel, the light there, but even stronger, meaning everything looks more white. Mm-hmm. So this painter, when you see it from the first time, you feel, wait, that's only a white painting. I don't see anything, until you realize that it's actually showing to you a landscape. But how do you see it there, which is super white, compared to European light, for example, during autumn? And yes, we will provide a link for him.
Okay, you sparked my interest.
I think I would give the name of a woman, because most of the painters we know in France are men. Niki, she's a modern artist. She's doing like installation and sculpture, and she works mostly about like the body of women, colorful installation. That's amazing.
We'll check her out.
Yes, please.
Tadanori Yokoo, and he's from the 60s till now. Mm-hmm. And he mainly does pop art and opening for TV and collage, and also a lot of graphic designer, but considered as an artist.
And he's still active today?
He's still active.
Wow, that's a long
He also did
career.
Actor in the film. Like a multi-artist.
All right, interesting. Yeah. Gunter?
I guess mine would be Sally Mann. She's a photographer from the United States, reasonably well known. She put out some photographs that sparked some controversy back in the 80s of her own children. And anyway, it has more to do with American Puritanism than it does with anything, which is. But yeah, it's she's just incredibly. I just read a biography about her, and she's a very inspiring artist. So, yep.
All right, we'll move on to our rapid fire question. I'm going to ask you one question, and you just answer. I want you to answer as fast as you can with minimal thinking. Don't worry, it'll be fast and easy. Let's start with the easy part, okay? Give me your favorite place in Israel so far.
My favorite place in Israel?
Yeah.
Old Yaffo.
Old Yaffo. All right.
Teder.
Okay. That's a nightclub.
In Florentine.
Yeah. Hetzu?
Old Jaffa.
Old Jaffa. Okay, that's two for Jaffa. And?
Cafe Hanoi. It's a restaurant.
Okay. It's a Vietnamese restaurant.
Yeah, Vietnamese restaurant.
All right. Question number 2. Give me your most hated stereotype of your own culture.
Corruption.
French people are stinking.
Japanese people very strict. Dame. It's like no.
Loud.
All right. See, that was fast. You did well. Anyway, I want to thank my amazing guests. I hope you continue and be creative and flourish. And I want to thank everyone who is listening. And if you like this episode, or if you have something that you would like to share with us, we would really appreciate it. Also, you can find us on all the podcast apps. And if there's a podcast app that you can't find us, please let us know, because we should be there. And we're trying our best to be in everywhere that's convenient to you. Of course, you can follow us on Facebook and on Twitter and on YouTube. And we'd love to hear from you if you want to be a guest on the show, if you have questions, or if you want to comment on something, if you want to tell us about how things are where you're from. We'd love to hear it. If you have ideas for episodes, basically anything you want, any way you want to communicate with us, we welcome with open arms. And we would appreciate if you talked about this podcast with your friends and people who are like-minded, so more people will discover us. And thank you very much. And thank you.
Thank you.